Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Holly Mumby-Croft.
And apparently I'm third. I'm Andrew Percy.
Yet again, with a really long delay, despite the fact that we coordinated our sequence in advance. Welcome back to the show, guys.
Despite the fact that we wrote your name down for you and gave it to you, and all you had to do was read your own name out.
Words can be violent, as I've said before on this.
My highlight of the week so far, Holly, I don't know if you've seen this, but yesterday, we're recording this on October 28th, but yesterday, Elon Musk and his Grok team have released Grokipedia, which is their AI version of a Wikipedia. And of course, our friends shared with us the profile of one Andrew Percy, former MP, and it's amazing because a good chunk of it has me included. It. Yeah, Andrew's here, but I somehow make it onto his profile, so I'm sure Andrew's going to think it's completely stained now. But the best part is the profile talks about his catastrophic loss in the most recent election campaign.
Yeah, it was very
Andrew,
difficult.
All this time I thought you had stepped down. I didn't realize you lost. You've been making up all these lies about how your career ended.
To be absolutely clear, I'm a little bit angry about two things in this. One, not only does it say I lost, it then says I lost to somebody who I'd never even heard of. And obviously that's not true. But worst of all, Holly, you'll appreciate this, given that my opponent in 2015 was somebody I was very happy to beat. It says I only won by 7,000 votes in 2015. I won by 11,000 was my margin. So it's got that wrong. That's like the whole I lost is bad enough because obviously I didn't. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But secondly, that 2015 result, that's and it also describes my win in 2010 as broadly in line with the national swing. I heavily outperformed the national swing.
I was a big swinger. 65. I saw that. That was correct. So that's good.
I'm very angry about this, but I sent it to my old team, like Andrew and Robert, and said to them, this reflects badly on you two. So you need to find a way of fixing this because I'm incapable of, because obviously it's technology. But it reflects badly on... Did you read all the
way to the end, though? It's so, they're so long. I got bored of reading about how good I am and stop read. That's how long they are. I might go back to it later. Perhaps,
I like the fact that it keeps saying things as well, there are no scandals. There are no reported scandals. It's it says that.
I had a really good bit about all my rebellions, except for my best rebellion, which was free school meals, that I couldn't see on the list. So that annoyed me. Made me 2 years older than I am, which people are just going to be like, wow, she looks amazing.
No one will believe that anyway.
No, you're right. But yeah, it's kind of entertaining.
Skin. Although I do have a red patch.
Have you got one?
I haven't checked, but apparently I am identified in Andrew's own profile as.
Well, that's a bit sad, isn't it? When you're just an also ran. So basically, two people here have Wikipedia pages and this Grokipedia, and you're just literally your only claim to anything is that you get the crumbs off the plate on my Grokipedia page. Wow. It's humiliating, actually. No wonder you're looking down.
Yeah, it's pretty
When
miserable.
You go to bed tonight, I want you to think of that. I want you to think how humiliating it is that
I don't know if you guys can hear me,
your
but
only existence on Grokipedia is
on your profile.
Secondary
I'll have to get that fixed.
Thought to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, there we are. Should we get started then? By the way, we've got no beer. This is meant to be about beer as well. So next week we have to have beer. We're not having beer this week because Holly is ill with a serious case of the flu.
Right, because that's what's really stopping us.
Yeah. Well, it's called solidarity. Also, I do have meetings today, so yada, yada, yada.
Oh.
Sorry. I think
someone's got to work.
Oh, yeah, you did. You look like you were mouthing either insults at Joseph.
Yeah, my headphones stopped working. It was the best bit of the show. I really enjoyed it. It's good. You two are at your most articulate.
All right, let's get into it.
Let's go.
We got 3 stories, as usual, to walk through in this week's issue scan. One of them is not a specific story, but I think it sets the tone for our second story, so let's get into it. I'm calling this A Week in the Life of a Labour PM. So a journalist, Dan Hodges, posted a widely shared tweet last week framing the miserable week that Labour has had. Let me read out the tweet because I think it just so perfectly describes the kind of week that Keir Starmer and his government has. So it reads as follows. This week, the government's failure to find a solution to the Maccabi ban was then overshadowed by the revelation a small boat migrant had returned after less than a month, which in turn was overshadowed by the collapse of the rape gang inquiry, which in turn was overshadowed by Labour's collapse in Wales, which in turn was overshadowed by the conclusive proof Starmer lied over China, which in turn has been overshadowed by the revelation the Epping sex offenders on the loose. 1 week. 1 week, end quote, which I think is a reminder to anyone who hasn't really been active in politics that a week in politics is a fucking eternity. And when it's put that way, I mean, I get the sense, and I just want you guys to react to this, I get the sense that Labour just can't catch a break. Like, it's just one bad thing after another. And that was just last week, but it feels like this has been Labour's lot since they won, but more than a year and a quarter ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's not where the week ended as well, because lots of other things happened as well, including lots of business leaders coming out and warning about Labour's likely tax rises, employment rights bill issues. So this was just 1 week, but it does just we just have to take some of those things and just consider them for a moment for people who aren't listening. One of the things was that the Epping sex offender, who was an illegal immigrant who was about to be deported, was released and given £76 to go on his way when he was meant not to be released. And he tried to tell them he wasn't meant to be released, apparently, didn't he? And walked back in several times. And this is how broken the system is. And then obviously went on the run, and he was eventually captured in London. Oh, the funny thing about that is, of course, this is how politics makes hypocrites of everybody, is that the Justice Secretary obviously refused to resign. And at one time, he used to have, ministers meant to be responsible. But then we had one of our former colleagues, who was the former Home Secretary, tweeting something negative about it. So she was a Conservative Home Secretary, who then had to be reminded that the last time I think an illegal immigrant sex offender was freed accidentally was on her watch as Home Secretary. So maybe don't be quite so pious about it. So there's just quite a lot to unpack in this week. But yeah, they really can't get a break. I mean, but at the same time, they were the people who, when any of this was happening on our watch, were reveling in it, and obviously were telling us that, once they were in charge, the grown-ups in charge, everything would be fine. But I mean, it's this. I mean, I don't know about you, Holly. We're Conservatives, right? But it just feels even less in control than we were at the end, when we were definitely not in control.
Yeah, I agree. It's so terrible that this week, and I'm a Conservative, but I don't hate Labour, and I hope they would be more decent than this because I live here. But this week I actually woke in the middle of the night from a dream where I was so upset for everything that was happening to Keir Starmer that I was trying to help him and give the guy a hug, which is most unlike me. It's even pervading now into my subconscious that this is so terrible. It is just one thing after another after another. And I live here in this country. I really don't want them to be this bad.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people will feel the same.
Are they actually, sorry, Andrew, let me throw this question to you. Are they actually bad, or is it just a function of sometimes when you have one little misstep after another, then people just smell blood. And so they're looking for the fuck ups and the mistakes and the scandals, and just governing is just always messy. It's never perfect. There's always shit you have to handle. Plan A doesn't work. You go to plan B, you go to plan C. That's just normal when you are governing. Is it just a function of this is normal, but because people are smelling blood, every little fuck up is being sort of spotted out and is being spun out to be a bigger deal than it actually is?
I think there's three elements to it, right? First of all, as we've talked about before, the UK just has a very active journalistic scene, right? Political journalism, right? There are a lot of political journalists and we've talked about this and the difference with Canada, right? Where there are, whether it's the Times, the Telegraph, the Independent, the Guardian, the BBC with all of its people, Channel 4 News, the Mail, the Express, you just have so many outlets with political journals that they just are onto everything. I think that's one element of it. Secondly, there are just some of them who are terrible ministers, right? Who, the general quality of politicians, especially since Holly and I left, has kind of been going downwards, because why would you go into it now if you can be mildly successful in any other career, given all the abuse you get? And this was the same for us, right? We had some awful people in ministerial positions who didn't have a clue, were never able to push back on the system. And then I think, thirdly, it is just kind of bad policy. If you think one of those stories in that tweet is the migrant coming back, right? The small boat migrant who came back. They'd made this a flagship policy. It's a bit like when Rishi came out with his Stop the Boats thing, which was like kind of like you're telling everybody there's an issue with the boats. You're telling them we're going to stop them, but we actually had no powers to really stop them, thereby setting ourselves up for abject failure. And they haven't learned the lessons of that. So for that policy, this whole, so I don't know if anybody knows this, but basically these small migrant boats, they come across on these dinghies from France. We'd struck this deal with France, one in, one out for a legitimate, I think, asylum seeker. And this guy got sent back to France and then came back within like a month because he didn't feel safe in France or something. So but if bad policy, right? If you're going to set this as a policy, know that it's probably not going to work because of all the issues there are with the ECHR, Convention on Human Rights, all the rest of it. So I think there's those three elements together just mean, but I think there's a bigger question here is, can governments ever succeed then? Right? Can governments ever succeed in that environment where you have bad ministers, a civil service that's often against the policies you're trying to introduce, bad policy, and journalists who are just out for blood?
I throw something else into that as well, because it's also around what the backdrop is and how they started. And they started really, really badly because they wound loads of people up with things like winter fuel allowance. They upset farmers. They put up employers' national insurance, and all of those things just like started the trajectory off really, really poorly. And even for people, I was talking to someone the other day whose husband has been waiting for 14 years for Labour to get in, and now is just like so disappointed that you can't possibly gloat, because he's genuinely so disappointed you actually feel sorry for him, because he's got what he wanted and they're just so far below his expectations, and he's on their side. So it's about how they started and how they've performed over the last year as well.
They were also just so ill prepared, right? Because they'd done what Labour are always very good at doing to the Tories, which is just telling everybody that the Tories are evil. Well, not evil, but like, a nasty party, and are choosing. They always used to say, this is the language they would use in Parliament, was this is a political choice. So the fact that there wasn't a lot of spare money to throw at local government, this was a political choice. The fact that there wasn't more money to put into various public sector, this is a political choice. So they telegraphed that everything could be easily resolved by them just coming into power and being nice, unlike the Tories who were just being nasty. And it turns out, and this is the contrast with like when Blair came in. Blair came in with a growing economy because the Conservative government then had left a good economic inheritance, but with years of work by serious people on policy. This lot didn't have that, right? Because we were relying on the likes of, I won't name names, but some of them I like very much, but they're not real, political thinkers. They didn't really have much policy development beyond the Tories are bad and will be better, which is inevitably what you always say in opposition. But, Blair had the goodwill, he had the economic inheritance, and they'd done the homework on policy, right? This lot feels like that none of that had happened this time round. And also the economy just is the biggest drag, right? Because they don't have the fiscal headroom to do what they want to do probably on a lot of these things.
But that's interesting because the fiscal challenge is something like they're not the only government dealing with this, right? I mean, we're dealing with the same thing in Canada. And I suppose maybe it's just the result of Prime Minister Carney's popularity numbers so far that the Liberals in Canada have not been dealing with the same. There's no sense that ever since Carney's come to power that the Liberals, and we can get into this later when we talk about trade, because we will talk about some important trade developments in Canada, but the expectations management, I think, seems to be so unaligned, sort of out of whack between the two governments. And I wonder if the federal Liberals in Canada did a better job of managing expectations in Canada compared to Labour in the UK.
Well, I mean, look, I think there's another element there as well, though, right? Which is that Carney is talking about, 7% cuts across the board. And he has a caucus that seems like it's going to go along with that. The problem for Labour is cuts are required to balance the books because we can't just keep having tax rises. But their backbenchers, Starmer, unlike Blair, doesn't control his backbenchers, right? Many of them are hangovers from Corbyn era. Many of them come from the soft left. They do not have the tolerance for, quite big departmental cuts, as we saw on the welfare bill, right? Which, I think this week, I can't remember which financial institution came out saying Britain has to get the welfare bill under control because you look at where it's going to bloat to, but they don't have the political capacity to do that, even with a massive majority. Carney has that so far, it seems, buy-in from his backbenchers because, party loyalty is much stronger here. But Starmer never got control of the Labour Party. He inherited a lot of people who are from the soft left and some of them from even further left, right, who left over Corbynistas, and they will not allow him the space to do what's required.
Also, he can't give them the opportunity to win again in a lot of those cases. And we saw as people start to face the reality that they're probably going to lose their seat, that does affect people's behaviour and how cooperative they feel they want to be. And I think they're more likely to go out on a limb, more likely to say things a bit more freely in the press, more likely to rebel on stuff. It does make a difference, I think. And the polling must be pretty unpleasant for a lot of Labour MPs right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've caught up with a couple of Labour MPs recently, and just to catch up and stuff, and they've both said to me, "Well, I'm going to lose anyway." And these are in seats. One of them in a seat which is fairly rock solid Labour, but in the north of England, just like, "Well, I'm done anyway. I've lost." So they already think they've lost, which means when you have no skin in the game, you kind of like, I'd rather lose with my reputation, as it were, as like which we saw from our colleagues. Right, a lot of our colleagues started doing the same. Right, I mean, a lot of them left without any reputation.
I mean, you must know what that feels like, Andrew. It's not easy losing your seat when there's a massive change. But speaking of losing, why don't we move on to our second story, because I think it's deeply connected, which is, oh God, and I'm going to really
I haven't forgotten that comment, and I will.
You come back to
at a moment, like, do something that will so personally wound you that it will, just as you close your eyes at night, pop into your head and make a little tear come down your eye. But it'll be coming from a place
that
of
was
love.
Really funny. I absolutely thought that was so funny. Well done, Joseph. That was really funny.
You're also on the list now, and I also know where you live, Holly. So just saying.
Yeah.
So
you do, because you always turn up on Christmas Eve.
So you guys are going to have to help me out with my pronunciation here, because our second story of the week is the by-election in Wales, in Caerphilly,
Philly,
Plaid Cymru,
Plaid Cymru.
Plaid Cymru.
It's Party of Wales in Welsh.
Yes,
Joseph's not bilingual.
They won 47% of the vote in by-election last week. Reform surged to 36%. Labour collapsed to 11% in what is a historical low for them.
They held the seat, remember? It was a Labour seat in the Welsh Senate. It was their seat, and they went down to, as you've said, 7%?
11%. 11%, yeah, is the reporting I've seen. Obviously, Nigel Farage has framed second place for reform as proof that reform is now Labour's main challenger in parts of Wales, while commentators are calling this a wake-up call for Starmer's party. I find that a bit funny. I feel like there's been a lot of wake-up calls over the last little while, but it seems like the electoral map might be in flux, even in places where maybe many people weren't expressing it. Do you guys think this is, in the Canadian context, usually by-elections are not something we pay too much attention to, because often you will get the odd flip and this or that, and it's like, well, because voter turnout's so low, and often sort of normal voting patterns will return when you get to a general election period. Do you guys see this as this being a one-off, or is this a sign of something much bigger underway in terms of the way the electoral map might be shifting?
I asked AI to compare the results with the polling to see if the results actually were in line with what was expected. So this could be completely wrong because I haven't checked it. It's just literally what AI has said to me. But the results were supposed to be, I've got it written down, Reform 42%, Plaid Cymru 38%, and Labour 12%. So that's interesting. I wonder if Reform were expecting to win it.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, also remember the Conservatives, who've never had a chance in a seat like this, had only 2% of the vote. It was the worst by-election result for the Conservatives in history. But also, I think it was the turnout. The turnout was over 50%, which I think was higher than the turnout in the actual Senate election. So which was made up of two types of voters, right? Motivated reform voters, many of whom probably didn't vote last time, and also motivated progressive voters who who obviously rallied behind Plaid. So you'll have had a lot of people who Plaid a kind of soft nationalist party who advocate Welsh independence, but nobody really takes that as a concept that seriously, because polling consistently seems to show Welsh people have no interest in independence, really. But you had people who were unionists who would have just voted for the progressive option. And I think so I suppose the interesting debate that's occurred since is, what does it really mean for Reform, who were tipped to possibly win this one? Well, their vote share still went up 34%. And this is a seat which my understanding is less good for them demographically than some other seats in that part of Wales. But also they're still doing incredibly well, but then this progressive alliance is clearly a motivator as well. That bodes really well for the SNP, in the Scottish parliamentary elections next year. It bodes well for Plaid in the Welsh Senedd elections. It bodes well for the Liberal Democrats in parts of England where they can present themselves as the soft alternative. And actually, I read an interesting piece that said every party is a kind of anti-reform party, which all the main parties are an anti-reform party, and they all have a different message on that, starting with the Conservatives who are, look, we agree with them a bit, but we're just nicer, right the way through to the SNP, who's obviously and Plaid, who would be at the further end of they abhor everything that reform stand for. But so I think the interesting thing is, does this prove there's a ceiling for reform? Because ordinarily, if they got that percent in a split vote, they should win the seat. And they won't be able to perhaps rely on splits as much. So they will need there's a certain demographic of seat where they will hit their ceiling because there just aren't enough Progressive Alliance voters to stop them. But maybe their growth is limited beyond that, where there's more mixed demographics, where they could have won on splits if this Progressive kind of alliance holds in a general election, which is a hard thing to predict because obviously by-elections, with which the Brits love by-elections, right? By-elections are very much part of the British political system. People behave differently in by-elections. But I think it certainly for the SNP, it bodes really well. It still means Reform will probably become the official opposition in Scotland, probably the official opposition in Wales next year. Well, doubtless the official opposition in Wales. There was talk even of them possibly being the government. I think that maybe goes out the window. It's just thinking that this is it. There's questions for all sides right now. But for Labour, I mean, what a disaster, right? I mean,
Holly, do you have a view on what Labour can do to turn this around? I mean, like, it seems like they're getting taken to line. We talked about how potentially bad expectations management, maybe not the most talented roster on their front bench and cabinet, which is not, they wouldn't be the only government to deal with that. But what is it? Are they just getting it wrong on the core issues like immigration, cost of living? Like, if you were to get hired by Labour to help turn things around, would you have a clear view on how they stop the bleeding?
She wants to hug Keir Starmer, so she might.
She dreams.
And you know how often I hug someone. It is pretty unusual for me to be so moved by someone's problems.
You like the pandemic because it kept people 6 feet away from you, right?
Yeah, just do the elbows. It's fine. First of all, they've only got the cards they've got in their deck of cards to play with, and we've seen the quality of some of those cards, so that's a challenge. And I was going to ask you earlier, Joseph, when we talked about the various different awful things that have happened over the last week, at what point do people stop listening to each individual piece of bad news and just form a very generalized view that something is terribly wrong? Because I started to feel, not least because people are being a bit nicer to former Tory MPs now, that people are actually just generally starting to feel like things are bad. And I think that's much harder to turn around.
Yeah, it seems like they've lost the plot. And then once you lose a plot, you're screwed. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's weird because normally you get to this stage by your third term in government, right? Like third termitis. Like, it's the fact that it's happening so soon into the mandate is just absolutely mind-boggling. I wonder if this ought to be a lesson for, actually, of all people, Prime Minister Mark Carney in Canada, which is right now, I think Carney's been able to get away with not being focused on cost of living, on housing, and on crime, arguably immigration, but I don't think that's nearly as an acute of a pain point in Canada as it might be in the UK. But you look at the other factors, the economic conditions, cost of living, and crime, and his government doesn't seem to be communicating very strongly or proactively on those core issues. It seems a bit more responsive, and they're very much focused on presenting him as this globe-trotting former banker who's going to be able to get us better deals around the world and get us out of this problem that we have with the US on tariffs. It is, at some point, I think something's going to break on that. And if the Liberals in Canada were to get a sense of how quickly it can turn, I would say to them, look at how things are turning so miserably for Labour. And you might want to have an answer on these issues before it's too late.
Yeah, I mean,
because people just stop listening. I think they stop. I mean, I think we saw that towards the end of the last Conservative government in the UK. People just fed up. It's almost like, they've checked out of the relationship. They're not interested in anything you've got to say. And then you get the competence issue, which is, even if you come up with an absolutely amazing idea that would definitely work, no one really believes you're going to be able to do it or that you will do it. So they just don't take in the information anymore. But like you said, it's incredibly early for that to be happening. Yeah.
So I was staffing in the last 4 years of the Conservative mandate that we had in Canada, and it was during our majority mandate, which is our last mandate. And we started to feel like you felt it that you got to a point where Canadians were just kind of tired, just tired of the message, tired of our lot, our tone, everything. Not that we were equipped to like adapt to that with any level of agility, but people got tired, and then that's what enabled change and Trudeau to come through. But I still find it amazing that it's happening so quickly. The example I just talked about, that we were in our third term at that point, and that naturally happens, I think, when you get so late in a mandate. But this is crazy.
Do you remember when we used to sit there in the tea room, Holly, and with our amazing skin and hair look brilliant, and like not only would colleagues flock to us, but we'd also talk about them openly in front of them, and they just wouldn't be able to, as we've talked about before.
This is very true.
However,
very true.
so many of them would say things like, "Oh yeah, actually my inbox is really quiet, so I don't think this is a big issue." And I just think this is the worst outcome for you. It's like they're not even, the electorate isn't even bothering with us. They've so moved on from us that they're not even bothering. I don't know whether that's the case for Labour MPs at the moment. I think we'll have to ask some, but that's the worst situation you can be in. I think, to your contrast with Carney, Joseph, he has the one big advantage Starmer doesn't, is that he has Trump, right? And there was polling this week, showing that a huge percentage of the electorate, possibly even the majority, don't think anybody could negotiate with Trump. So even if he fails on this negotiation, he has quite a lot of leeway with the electorate, so far as we are at the moment. And that's just something Keir Starmer doesn't have, right? So immigration, which has been a big issue, people expect the government to sort it out. And it's no good saying, oh, well, it's just all terribly difficult, because they don't believe, for the large part of the electorate, they believe that the government could do something about it if it wanted. Carney's advantage is with Trump, a large part of the electorate believes that even though he wants to do something, he can't, and that is doomed to failure anyway because of the, behavior of Trump, who they would see as like a man-child. So I think he's in a much stronger position because he's got the perfect kind of enemy at the moment, right?
Right.
The other side of that as well is that the public in the UK, a large part of the public, feel that Nigel Farage could do something about immigration if he was there. And that's contrasted all the time with what Keir Starmer isn't doing.
Because nobody believes Pierre Poilievre, as the opposition leader, could do any better of a job, really. In fact, they don't. Polling shows. And
I agree with that. I agree with you on the Trump thing. I think right now, so long as that's the frame, but at what point, my concern, if I'm on Carney's, if I'm on Team Carney, is at some point the frame will shift, and Canadians will just get tired of the whole Trump thing and go, we have to move on. And yes, you're out in Asia this week trying to secure additional trade deals, this or that. But like my mortgage is still a struggle. Every time I go to the grocery store, things are more expensive. Like people are going to get to this point where like, okay,
unemployment rates.
Yeah, what the fuck have you done on these things? And I'm picking an arbitrary timeline. You hit December, January, and people go, okay, you've been prime minister long enough that we should start to see some positive effects on the domestic front, and not feeling those. And I as soon as Trump is no longer the frame within which people are considering the political choices the prime minister has to make, I worry he's at extreme risk. And I think Labour serves as a not perfect analog, but something worth them paying attention to.
I can
also,
tell you
can Prime Minister Carney go back to America any more times, or does that become a focal point for that?
Well, interesting you raise that, Holly. I think that's a perfect segue to our third story, because I think we can dig into this a little bit more, because I do think Carney now is presented with an interesting challenge. So our third and final story for our issue scan this week is that the province of Ontario aired a high-dollar anti-tariff TV spot during the World Series. It stitched together audio from Ronald Reagan's 1987 radio address to
just explain what the World
tariffs.
Series is, right? So it's where the Montreal Jay Blues are competing for the Stanley Cup against the dodgy Las Vegas team. I think they're so dodgy they're called like the Las Vegas Dodgers or something like this. And they use like a stick to hit a ball, and then they run round not very many times, like these little plastic pads. It's a really great.
Is it like the FA Cup, or is it like something like that?
Remember, you used to play rounders at school. You used to play rounders. Yeah. It's
something like that
for grown men.
It feels incredibly unpatriotic for me to say this, but I really don't like. I'm not into baseball at all. So I am trying to get into this moment, because the Toronto Blue Jays are playing the LA Dodgers in the World Series. A crazy game last night.
I just said
18 innings.
Said that.
Yeah, something like that. But anyway,
Well, I would be
obviously,
into it if it was Canada versus the US, but when it's like one team from one to another team, I just think, well, that's Toronto's team. I know it's Canada's team. Obviously, I'm joking and trying to provoke a response, but I'm like, it's LA versus Toronto. I live in Vancouver and in London and wherever else, Yorkshire. I don't really care unless one of those places is playing. If it was national, I watched that like Canada US hockey game. I was quite into that. But
well, someone who does
Anyway,
seem to care about the World Series would be President Trump,
yeah.
because Ontario, let's get back to it. Ontario aired an ad, and it features a sort of stitched up, edited version of Ronald Reagan's 1987 radio address that argued against tariffs. And so the province of Ontario paid to have these run during the World Series. And then over the weekend, as a result of this, a couple of things happened. Trump said he was calling off negotiations with Canada, trade negotiations, and then decided to up the ante by saying because Ontario had not taken the ad down in time during the World Series, that there'd be a 10% increase in tariffs across the board. And then on top of that, the Reagan Foundation accused Ontario of misrepresenting Ronald Reagan's radio address, and so labeled the whole thing misinformation. And then in the middle of, as a result of this, Premier Doug Ford, Ontario's premier, was out doing American television on Monday defending this and actually talking about this being one of the most successful ads in history, citing the fact that it had 11.4 billion impressions, which I'll get to this in a second, is a totally made up number. Impressions does not equal people, because as you might know, there are not 11.4 billion people in this world. So impressions is such a made up fucking metric. It's a vanity metric, we call it in this business.
So does that mean
I never report out impressions when I'm briefing my clients on campaigns, because it is such a made up number. But
so
anyway,
11.4 billion, does that mean every Mongolian has watched it at least once then?
I've watched it a few times. This could be because of me. I have watched it, and I'm quite a big Doug Ford fan now. Gotta tell you.
So that's the context of what occurred. Let's break into it, because there's sort of two camps, at least in Canada, from what I can pick up from how people have reacted to this. There are those who are obviously in the Doug Ford camp that say, like, someone needs to start fighting back to Trump. We can't always allow him to boss us around. And Doug Ford is the perfect bad cop to Mark Carney's good cop. And so Mark Carney can play charming Canadian Prime Minister when he needs to in the White House. Doug Ford can come in and sort of whack him around when needed. That it's good for domestic politics, because Ontarians want to see their premier defending manufacturing jobs and auto jobs. And so that's one argument. Of course, the other argument is this is such a dumbass fucking move, because you've now set back negotiations on a deal. We seem to be like falling further and further down the pecking order of any country being able to secure any kind of agreement. And I know we can argue whether the UK truly got a trade deal and whether a lot of these other countries got the type of comprehensive trade deal we'd want, but they're at least getting something that they can work with.
High tariffs.
Yeah, and they've avoided high tariffs. We seem to be getting nothing. And then the province decides to blow $75 million. Now, it seems like they may get some of that money back, but whatever, $75 million on an ad buy during the World Series. It seems so short-sighted, and I'm so perplexed at the decision-making behind this. So I'm very curious to get your respective views on this. Let's go to Holly first, though.
So when I first saw this, I wrote down on my little notepad, it's very important whether Prime Minister Carney did or did not know about this advert before it was made live, used, played, whatever you call it. Do we know the answer to that? Because Doug Ford says he did know.
Doug Ford is saying he briefed the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, and the Prime Minister's office seems to be kind of avoiding answering the question with any clarity. So yes. Yeah.
Then.
Correct. Which plays into the narrative of maybe this was a bit more orchestrated than I certainly first felt. I felt when it came out, I'm like, it either was completely unorchestrated or it was. You can't be in between. And if it was orchestrated, then maybe it is part of a larger strategy where the Prime Minister has kind of had a off-the-record chat with premiers saying, hey, premiers, you guys can play the bad cop role. I got to maintain some kind of a civil relationship with Trump, but we need to prove to people that we are still elbows up and that we're fighting. If you guys want to take on sort of that aggressive posture, happy to do it. Let's see where the cards fly. But I don't know that works in the Prime Minister's favor to either look like he can't take the fight himself or to look like he wasn't in the loop at all. He can't, it can't be both, right?
And at the minute, you just assume it's whichever one of those two that you want it to be. But who is this conversation supposed to be with? This advert's not really for Donald Trump, is it? It's for American people to see.
Well, notionally, because it is an ad that's directed at American audiences, placed so that it reaches American audiences, and Premier Ford certainly would have you believe that's who he was communicating with. I don't believe that for a second. I think the audience for this was domestic, as in it was intended for Canadians to see that someone is going elbows up against the president. I still think, even if that is true, it's still a dumbass move. I just don't know now's the moment to start flinging mud at the president. It's just, I don't know that we have that luxury when so much of our trade in the immediate term is so dependent on that marketplace. We are so far away from properly diversifying our trade routes. Just, it makes no damn sense to me. Sorry, Andrew, we've gone on now. Maybe we should let you talk.
Oh, I don't know.
let him
Holly,
talk,
did you
go on.
like the adverts? What did you think when you saw them?
I thought it was good quality, as in it was smart. It depended, whether it was productive, whether it would achieve anything is a different conversation, but it was memorable, engaging. You actually will look at it and watch it. It's very clear what it's trying to say.
I was
Reminded
thinking,
me of that Green Party one that we had out a couple of weeks ago
oh, I didn't
here
see
in the
that.
UK. Yeah, just like it's the tone, it was tonally similar, I thought. Just the look of it.
I was trying to think of like whether you could take anything over from the post-Brexit UK-EU negotiation. I was thinking if the UK had gone and put a load of adverts out into Europe saying basically, you guys need us, yada, 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 this is really silly what you're trying to do. I don't know whether that would have worked. And then I realized that that comparison doesn't really work because in the UK, you had about half the electorate who utterly opposed Brexit, whereas you don't have in Canada half the electorate who think Donald Trump is right. Because, we had people, British parliamentarians, the Scottish government going off to Brussels and basically encouraging Brussels to deal with Britain badly and to be tough on us, which seemed deeply unpatriotic, but seemed to be loved by that part of the electorate that were. So maybe that doesn't carry over. I think I've like three other quick things is, first of all, it misquoted Reagan. So when the Reagan Foundation comes out and says, this wasn't what he actually thought. And we've discussed this before, Joseph, actually, when we talked about Reagan's views on tariffs, where we were like, if you remember at the beginning, we were like, yeah, Reagan was very anti-tariff. He had a complex relationship with tariffs. But it was actually one of our buddies, Andrew, who contacted and said, yeah, but look at like where the trade deficit was in the 80s versus where it is now. The trade deficit with largely friendly countries, the US trade deficit. Now it's with people who are deliberately trying to undermine. So it's with our like competitors slash enemies slash, well, we can't even get into that in the UK, whether some of those countries are enemies or threats or whatever, because the government doesn't know. But my second takeaway was the EU and the UK had a much less reliant relationship on the US for trade. The UK, still the UK's single biggest trading partner, but obviously well under 50%. And the EU and the UK decided with Donald Trump not to go for aggressive kind of insults, but to kind of like just, try and negotiate the guy with flattery and all the rest of it. And they succeeded, yada, 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 because everybody knows that Trump doesn't respond to anything other than flattery. Now, Canada, as we've talked about many, many times, is so reliant on the US, is in such a weak position vis-a-vis the US, that it seemed to me the only way this ends is with kind of Prime Minister Carney having to bend the knee a bit to the US. And I still continue to hold that view, as painful as it might be for many Canadians. I just don't see how this helps any of that. But similarly, other people have come out and said, oh, this is brilliant because it's all, because there's such strong anti-Trump sentiment in Canada that you can keep riding this. That's fine until more factories close. That's fine until the jobless figure goes up even more, till the prices go up even more. It's great to feel good, but practically the best thing for Canadians is a solution to this. This doesn't seem to have helped a solution. And I get the painful politics of that, but
Well, we talked about this offline briefly yesterday, Andrew, which is I think it's possible for Canadians to hold two views in their mind, which is an extreme dislike for Trump, which I think is a strong. You look at any polling numbers, strong, right? You are in the right to go after Trump, but I think it's also possible for the same people who hold those views to go, yeah, but let's not be dumb about it. Like we still have to be smart in how we manage this. And is this a short, tactical, emotionally charged move, which is this allows Ontario to feel good about itself because it did something that earned a lot of PR attention, and it did. It is, park aside the fact that it does slightly tinker with the flow of Reagan's original radio address. It is a beautiful ad. It is emotionally compelling. It is a well-crafted ad. So from a purely tactical perspective, it's brilliant. But I think it's strategically, it is so flawed. And I think it's possible that on this issue, enough voters actually do understand the difference. And I know that because I had people like just passive observers of politics sending me messages over the weekend going, what the hell was Doug Ford thinking?
Yeah,
Right?
What do you think
I think
about
that's
Trump's reaction to it strategically? Because he could have just completely ignored it, brushed it off, said it's nonsense, not interested, haven't seen the advert. But he
why run
didn't
the
do that.
risk? Because we know what he's like. If he feels he's been attacked, he
Yeah.
will push back. I just
Are you
struggle to.
surprised by how much he has pushed back rather than just saying it's nonsense and ignoring it?
Well, the federal government was telegraphing that there'd been progress on trade negotiations, at which point the natural strategy would be go quiet, don't kind of do anything to poke the bear. And maybe they didn't expect him to cut things off, but maybe some great brains were thinking, we, the federal government, will be the reasonable guys. You guys go out and do all this shouty stuff, and we'll be like, oh, look, we're being reasonable, yada, 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 and we'll be able to separate. Trump doesn't care. It's just as far as he's concerned, it's Canada that's done it. And the BC government is apparently going to put adverts out as well, slightly different, is saying it's going to do that. But I struggle to understand the strategy behind it. And I would love to be proven wrong and that there is some great strategy and that will help lead to a deal. I cannot see what the possible advantage of this is at this stage other than making people feel good. Well, that's great if there's an election, but there isn't an election in Ontario. There isn't a federal election. So I don't understand that. And I think then the other bit I can't quite get of it, which perhaps the question is answered by the fact the federal Liberal government may have known about this, because as we talked about this in the office yesterday, Joseph, and you need to appreciate this, Holly, my political brain is going, I'm thinking if I'm the Ontario opposition, I would be kind of, this guy just blew $75 million of your money for social media TikTok ego of being able to boast about 11.4 billion impressions, and as a consequence has just destroyed any progress on the negotiations which are absolutely necessary to protect jobs in Ontario and in Canada. Ergo, as much as we dislike Donald Trump, he has acted now as Donald Trump's useful idiot in giving Donald Trump the excuse he always wanted to call off these negotiations. And I'd also be saying, we'd all be doing, we've been on the receiving end of this. You add up $75 million, how many paramedics, how many operations, how many nurses. So it's like, 11.4 billion impressions on TikTok or X thousand operations, you choose. Now, I'm saying that as a kind of political outsider, in the sense of I don't have perhaps that emotional response that a lot of Canadians have to just what's going on. And Trump is so in people's heads that any other conversation is impossible to have. But I would just be having a field day with this, but maybe I don't understand properly.
Which makes it more and more and more crucial. I still think the most important element of this will turn out to be, did Prime Minister Carney and his communications team know about this or not? Because that question is not going to just go away.
And the White House will want to
whatever
know
side
that.
of the argument you're on, you want to know the answer to that question. And you cannot just say, we're not going to comment. That's ridiculous. How can you say we're not going to comment? There's no way that will stick.
If it comes out that they did, or if they know about the BC ones that are about to go out apparently on softwood lumber, which I think are going to be slightly different in tone, then it's, if you're Trump, you're like, these guys have like got a secret plan to attack me, yada, yada, yada. I don't know, Joseph. I can't see the advantage of this, but yet lots of people seem to like it as well.
A lot of people do, and they'll argue that, well, what else are we supposed to do? Nothing's working right now. We don't have an agreement, and Canadians still want to go elbows up, and like we got to fight. And that's the only way. That's the only thing that the guy's going to respond to.
But it isn't, because, well, he'll respond, but he won't respond. It's come to the deal, right? To a table, right? He has to be flattered. He has to be given something. He has to have something shiny to point at. And go, oh, look, I got this. Just seeing what he's been doing out on the fringes of the ASEAN conference. This is what the guy has to have, shiny things, and has to have a win. And painful though that is for people to appreciate, Keir Starmer, Ursula von der Leyen, the EU, the UK, lots of other countries have just decided to give him his shiny thing, praise him, yada, 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 get down on their knees, do whatever is required, and, come away with the best deal they could. And I don't understand.
Why hasn't Prime Minister Carney already given him a shiny thing? What shiny thing has he got that Trump wants?
Well, I mean, perhaps that have look, they've certainly talked about things that can be renegotiated as part of the NAFTA arrangements and all the rest of it. So I think, but the government was telegraphing that progress was being made, which again is kind of, if things are going to shit or to cock, as we might say, then I get like throw everything at it. But on the one hand, perhaps it was a lie; those negotiations were going nowhere. But then I don't know why Doug Ford would want to be, as a progressive conservative from Ontario, want to be the guy who then gives the Liberal government cover for the negotiations failing.
Well, maybe we should let Doug Ford speak in his own words, because he is our clip for this week's lipstick on a gerbil. So should we try and pull that up and
let's
make
do
sense
that.
of it? Okay. So we thought it made a lot of sense this week just to double click on this Doug Ford Ontario World Series ad, because he was out doing media on Monday, American media, explaining his rationale and his decision on this. So we'll play a clip from an interview he did with CNN, and we'll make sense of whether whether the premier appropriately defended the strategic. Let's park for a second whether the ad itself is brilliant or not. We may have views on that, but whether it's the right strategic move. So here's the clip, and we'll give it a rating.
Canada's unemployment rate, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, is now at its highest point in 9 years. Do you have any regrets about stirring the pot, possibly making things harder on your fellow Canadians due to this retaliation from President Trump?
No, I don't believe so. The person that started this whole thing around the world, not just with Canada, is President Trump. And the American people are finally feeling the effects of tariffs. And it's going to continue. The more tariffs, it's more of a tax on Americans and less jobs for America. If anyone reads into many speeches Ronald Reagan did after the free trade agreement with Canada, with former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, which is no longer with us, he was one of my mentors, and he created more jobs, not only in Canada, but also in the U.S. than we've ever seen. Again, protectionism does not work. We want to create more jobs in the U.S., more jobs in Canada. I believe in the AMCAN fortress, which is the American-Canadian fortress. And let's be the wealthiest, richest, safest two countries in the entire world. We have so much to offer the Americans that we give them, no matter if it's our oil or our uranium or our potash that keeps your agriculture sector, or nickel, high-grade nickel from Ontario. And the auto sector, they're losing billions of dollars.
Okay. I listen to that and I go, in one sense, running the ads, if he created the platform for Ford to come out and say these things, it's not so bad. That's a pretty decent answer to the question. But I'll give my rating last this week. Andrew, what do you prepare to give this one? 3 coats, 2 coats, 1 coat, 0 coats?
I still think, because we haven't fully understood the strategy, and it may be brilliant, so it may not even be a gerbil that requires lipstick. But if it is a gerbil that requires lipstick, and if this was an error, I think that was 3 lipsticks. I think that was a pretty good response. I think it was a pitch perfect response, and it does kind of prove why Ford, for a lot of the conservative movement, don't like him. Is good. He's got that folksy ability to communicate well. So I think 3 coats.
Holly, what do you think?
I must confess, I am a Doug Ford fan. So I am like, this is right up my street. I'm easily giving him 3, 4. I give him 4. What can you get for 4? That's better than a 3. That's fantastic. I know. I mean, he's very relaxed. He's completely statesman-like. He basically says, "Not my fault. The other boy started it." It's just kind of good communication. But I mean, I agree with Andrew. We'll have to see how this plays out. But yeah, I'll give it a 3, but only because we don't have 4 on the scale.
Can we stop sharing the screen as well? Because I'm hearing everything twice, which was great because Holly's analysis is brilliant. I just don't want to hear yours twice.
The only other thing I'll throw in is, because I can't remember Reagan at all, and I can't remember speeches, but Andrew, you will remember those speeches in the 80s, and you'll remember his tariff views. I mean, which side are you falling down on? I know you've talked about Joseph as well. Does he love tariffs? Does he hate tariffs? Did he hate tariffs?
I think he was generally anti-tariff, but he understood that sometimes tariffs were required, right? As all government, like all free marketeers, you and I argued for steel tariffs, if you remember, because other people had tariffs and everyone tariffs everybody else, even, but claims to be a free trader.
I only really said that because I wanted to say how old you are. That's enough analysis. I just wanted everyone to know that you were alive, you were there with your little black and white TV set with the family all sat round listening to
it. The 3 TV channels that existed. Listening to the radio home service.
Yes.
I'm giving this one three coats, by the way, as well. And the reason I'll give it to net new from what you guys have already said about it is also for an American audience, which is presumably important to who he was speaking with in this interview. I think just comes off as incredibly warm. Like, look, Americans, we don't want to do this just as much as you're not probably enjoying this, and we will happily go back to playing nice cop, being the good guys in this. And you guys stand a lot to lose. Like, it's just a very warm, empathetic tone, and I do think it's why he is a strong communicator and why he's done so well electorally. And it leaves me with a little bit of hope that there's actually a lot more to this strategy than this first meets the eye. And I will be the first to come back on the show at a later date and say, and eat crow and say I had it all wrong. It was a brilliant strategic move. And we just didn't see all the pieces of the chessboard being lined up properly yet.
I feel like I'm not clever enough to understand why this is genius, but it smells a bit genius. So I'm just going to wait and see. But I've got this little feeling it might work.
I think also just the fact that there isn't in the UK, politics is a bit more aggressive, right? I do think someone would have come out and absolutely nailed them for spending $75 million of taxpayers' money and been doing that whole thing. But there just doesn't seem to be any of that fire and also there aren't as many as we've said, newspapers, political journals who are out to kind of do this gotcha thing. So it's kind of, you kind of get a bit of a free pass to do it, which perhaps is why a lot of Canadians will shrug their shoulders and be like, oh, I just assume it's a good thing because it's telling the Americans that everything's terrible and they shouldn't be doing this and it's bad for them. So maybe that's the strategy. Maybe it's brilliant.
This could be the psyche, though. It speaks to the psyche of Canadians right now, which is we're feeling so bruised and battered that we're not willing to take a swipe at one of our own people who's trying to do something.
In case you get seen as pro-Trump.
Yeah, exactly. So it's we're all in a fight. Okay, Doug Ford thinks he's got one way of doing it. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. We have nothing to lose. And so let's just, again, rally around each other rather than be critical of each other. So
but just a final question on this then. Because America is so divided politically, in the same way that the UK kind of was on the Brexit issue, is it going to make any difference to any American's point of view anyway?
Nobody knows.
I don't think so.
Silence reigns. The only thing I know is that I don't think that the full clips of the Reagan speeches on YouTube are going to get 11 billion views. But I am going to check later in the week.
Impressions, Holly, you're triggering me.
Impressions, sorry.
Impressions.
What we are going to do.
So how many people are there? 8 billion, right? You said there are 8 billion people. Yeah. So we all have to watch it, nearly 1.5 times.
And I don't think people in North Korea are able to watch it, so we've got to take them out of the equation.
I take them out of the equation.
And the internet connectivity is so bad in many parts of Britain, it's impossible to watch it without it buffering. So you'll just give up. But another great
might be why I often wondered if the internet connection was the reason you did lose in 2024. People were just so upset that you hadn't speeded up their internet, Andrew, that you lost your seat. So embarrassing.
There is a photo of you and I stood next to a green BT exchange box that's getting upgraded to super fast broadband, Holly. So my failure is your failure, if you remember. In fact, we'll dig that picture out for next week. In fact, we might if I dig it out now, maybe Joseph with his little skills can make it flash up on here.
My little skills.
Probably could.
Yeah, it's good.
My little skill is to bring this all to an end because we have gone well to time.
Are we going to send Holly, just before we do end, a framed photo of Doug Ford so she can have that on one side and her husband Paul on the other?
In the background?
I would absolutely love that. Which reminds me, I must get my Christmas present ready for you, Andrew, which is my annual calendar where every month is a photo of me.
Yes, I've received it every year.
Because I know it's important to you that you have that.
Yes, I put one of them in my little box of memorables the other day when I was moving things around, well, actually months ago, and I found it and I was like, oh, I'm going to keep that.
Quite right. It's a very treasured gift.
Joseph's trying to end this now, so we should probably let
I
him
am
do
trying
Sorry,
to end
it.
this
Joseph, go
thing.
on.
So
Yeah,
I'm just
sorry.
going to come in and say, don't forget to follow or subscribe. You'll find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on Substack if you go to craftpolitics.fm. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.